So, probably about 5 or 6 months ago, I had the distinct privilege of being invited to speak along Pope Francis when he visited the United States on his most recent tour. He and I spoke together at the Ground Zero site where the September 11th attacks took place. We were speaking at a memorial museum that's been established there, and the audience had about 400 people, city officials, activists, faith leaders of different backgrounds, but in a way that only a man like the Pope could leverage his own position of authority and his own sense of values and commitment to bringing diverse people together. Is really amazing and remarkable convening. And a lot of people asked me, what was it like to meet the Pope? It was really interesting. For some reason, the question that I got asked the most was, what did he smell like? I said, I don't know, he smelled really good. What do you want me to tell you? About a week after he and I spoke together, I was giving a lecture at a university in Ohio in the United States. The university is called Case Western University. There's a young woman there as well who asked me, what was it like to meet the Pope? And I said, it was crazy, just the sheer numbers of people who were moved by this man's messages. Whether they had a deep relationship with their Catholicism, they had a tangential relationship with their Catholicism, whether they were people who weren't even Catholic at all. There were so many who were just taken aback by the things that he had to say. I said in New York, the kind of audiences that you saw for gatherings similar were usually for people who were celebrities or musicians. I'd never seen a religious figure garnish the kind of attention that this man did. I mean, literally people lined up for hours to just watch his car drive by, not to even hear him speak. I said all of his messages were scripted for the duration of his trip. People had written it down and he was reading off of paper. The night before he and I spoke together, he spoke at a very well-known cathedral in New York City called St. Patrick's Cathedral. There's about 3,000 people who were there listening to what he had to say. And for so many of them, this would have been the highlight of their life. That they would go on to tell their children and their children's children that night that the Pope had come and they got to hear him speak live and in person. I said what was crazy was that night he decided to go off script. And he first started his remarks by praying for 700 Muslims who had died that morning while performing the Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca. And I said to that girl, why do you think he would do something like that? He's in a city where the September 11th attacks took place. In a country where the relationship between Muslims and law enforcement, governmental apparatus is tenuous as best. Nobody would have faulted him had he not done it. They wouldn't have said, why did you not pray for those people? He simply did it because he felt that it was the right thing to do. This is a man who chooses to eat with the homeless rather than politicians. A man who asked his global constituency to take in Syrian refugees at a time when much of the world and its leaders were looking for every justification to keep people out and not let them in. A man whose Vatican recognized the statehood of Palestine. A person who understood that his existence was much bigger than he himself. And he had a unique opportunity to bring people together at a time when much of the world sought to just look for whatever justification to stay away from each other. And I think it's an important example to reflect upon and try to understand, especially if we're looking to really explore the idea of how do we come together across differences. Where you can just see day to day the kind of rhetoric that's prevalent in the world, that is motivated by a lot of self-interest, that teaches us to engage diverse societies, not in ways where we really validate and justify our coming together, but through a lens and a framework that is more antagonistic and justifies and validates our being separate from one another. The country that I come from, I'm sure you all see the news as much as I do, where literally you have individuals who are running for the highest offices in the country, for the presidency, who build their platforms off of very vilifying and demonizing platforms of minorities across the board, including Muslims. And I think what's important for gatherings like this is to make a determination individually on what end of the spectrum do you want to fall. You can take an example like the Pope, and you can say to yourself that that is one end of it. And you can take the likes of a Trump figure and his ilk and say that that is the other end. If I'm just really honest with myself and I take a look inside, where would I fall within that spectrum? Do I line myself up more towards bringing people together to give of myself without condition and qualification? And my movement is only either for myself and people who are like me. And it's easy for me to deepen divides with those who are different, or to justify the mistreatment of those who are not like me, simply by virtue of the fact that they are not like me. Where we are at New York University, and I know some of you are alumni. How many of you are actually alums from NYU? Just the two of you. I'm an alum too. My wife is also an alum. Where we work in New York University, we found a certain value in being able to utilize religion and faith as a tool for bringing people together. Our center, the Global Center for Spiritual Life at New York University, is a new division. And the impetus behind it is to think about how we can utilize religion as a catalyst for bringing benefit and good just to people. Through our doors, we estimate at least 5,000 to 6,000 unique individuals coming on a weekly basis for different programs, different events, different services. But what they've been able to achieve is an opportunity for organic development and organic growth. Interfaith and multi-faith work is not done in the way that it's done in much of the world, or at least throughout the United States, where you have a panel of people speaking to an audience of individuals who have never really sat down and talked to each other. They speak about something that they share in common for about an hour or so. They take some pictures, some photographs, and then for the next year or two, they don't talk to each other again. It doesn't really work in that way. What you saw was a story that wasn't just about a Muslim and Jewish person, but a story about individuals who could fully get away with never talking to each other. But when they come together, they're able to set a model and an example for communities that need something that validates for them convening in a safe space and recognizing their otherness, not in a way that's a disadvantage or a way that segments, but in a way that can really bring people together. For you yourself, you want to think just what's your exposure to those who are different from you? In an organic capacity, in a superficial capacity, or anything in between. In your own rearing, in your own upbringing, when you sit down to have a meal at your home, how often is the face that sits across from your face one that has a different skin complexion or is of a different skin color? Is of an individual who comes from a different place of cultural heritage or a different country of origin? A person who practices a different faith has a different set of convictions. A person who is not of the same social class, but comes from a different level of affluence and a different level of wealth. This is what our gatherings are set up as. The paradigm of gatherings that are divine in their undertones in comparison to gatherings that are human are quite distinct. In that you can have people from all backgrounds go into God's gatherings, but when you look at humans' gatherings, they're not about who it is that we let in, but more importantly, who it is that we keep out. Right? I work for New York University. I used to work for Princeton University, which has a reputation beyond most universities, at least in the States. The way Princeton maintains its reputation is not just because it lets students in who have a certain GPA, who have a certain level of extracurriculars, who have a certain standardized testing score, or any of those things. But Princeton is Princeton also because it keeps certain people out. And if Princeton started to let everybody in through its doors, it wouldn't be Princeton anymore. But contrast that to gatherings that are divine, at least theoretically. When nobody says, why did you let that poor person into that mosque? Why did you let that person who is not the same skin color as us into that church or synagogue? Why did you let that person who has no job into that temple? But if we started to let those people into our company, the first thing that would pop into most of our minds is, what would people say if they saw us interacting with these types of people? What would the community say if all of a sudden we started to have in our company those who are different and distinct from us? Again, not in a superficial way, but in a real way. My friend, the rabbi at NYU, he and I now share the title of University Chaplain. We have about 50 or 60 chaplains that work within our system of spiritual life at New York University. Protestants, Catholics, other Jewish people, Hindus, Buddhists, even humanist chaplains we have. As you can see, our relationship extends beyond just kind of a pulpit or just kind of a stage. Our children play together. At a time they shared nannies with one another. He literally lives down the hall from where we live. My wife and he and his wife and I, we were all pretty close to one another. The film shows our wedding day, and that he walked on the Sabbath about 90 blocks up and down. But it doesn't say that on that Saturday that we got married, it was also raining. But he still made that walk back and forth. When you have that kind of friendship, when you have that kind of depth to a relationship, you build an ally, you build a partnership, you create an opportunity to then go out and do work that's meaningful, that can galvanize many behind you to go out and then dare to be courageous enough to take on some of the world's challenges and inequities in ways that we're not necessarily doing, because all we come to do is really be with each other in moments. It doesn't have to be a self-deprecating conversation. It can be one that's very introspective. One that helps us to understand why it is that we see people in certain ways and why it is that we don't actually see them in certain ways. We overlook many people day to day who do many things for us, and people that could be our partners, people that could be our allies, because we put them in certain boxes, or we don't even have a consciousness of their existence. Their narratives are not things that we understand because we don't even think about them. We think purely from our experiences and then try to understand the world unconsciously, subconsciously, or even times regrettably consciously in the frame of whatever it is that I have gone through is what everybody else has gone through. Or if my life is going fine, then everyone else's life must be going fine. Or somebody else's challenge isn't that severe because look at what happened to me, which is somehow remotely similar, and that must mean that their life is not that difficult also. You start to think about the people that you overlook day to day. The people that you get away with never talking to or never speaking to. The ones that you have no interaction with, that you see in your workplaces, the ones that you see in the places that you eat, the ones that you see in the places that you socialize and frequent, but you don't even know their names. You saw where we live, my wife and I, in a New York University building. I walked into it one night. There's an elderly man who's a security guard who sits at the front desk who, when I walked in, I greeted him, said hello, asked him how his day was. Then I walked to the elevator to go up to my apartment, and I heard him from behind me in a very stern voice say, "Imam, I want to tell you something." So I went back to him, and I'm facing his profile. He's facing the door, and I'm facing in this direction. I say to him, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Every day, hundreds of people walk by me. and I have worked here for years. He said, you're the only one who ever asks me how I'm doing. And I want to just say thank you to you for that. Now, I'm not saying this to you to say to you that look at me, because I'm not anything special. And I'm not saying it to you to feel bad for that man, because he's doing great. Who I feel bad for is every person who walked by him and had full opportunity to take from him things that I have taken from him, but they didn't because all they saw was somebody who wasn't worth their time to sit down and have a conversation with. They didn't get to hear the stories of how proud he was that his grandchildren were the first to go to college. They didn't get to hear about every country that he visited in the world and how much the world has actually changed from the time he was a young person till who he is now. They didn't get to benefit from his experiences and see the world through his eyes for just a few moments. The people who lose out the most when the only people that we talk to is us ourselves is really nobody else other than us ourselves. And it's really easy to be yourself and talk to people who are just like you. Because when you're the king of your kingdom and all you do is sit in your own space, then there's no challenge to that. But you now have to adapt and really be who you are in settings and scenarios where people could care less about who it is that you are, and you have to figure out really what your convictions mean to you by being challenged as the only one who actually upholds them. It's that much better than to have a friend, even if they're not just like you, who can be there to support you, who can be there to stand with you. One of our fears becomes that if I start to engage those who are different from me, I have to then somehow give up a little bit of myself. I've actually become stronger in my faith and my understanding of who God is because of my relationship with my friend Yehuda. And to give you a highlight and an understanding of how you can just be yourself, even when you engage in this kind of relationship. Yehuda and I went to Duke University in North Carolina to speak to the university students there. And it was a snowy day in New York. He had an earlier flight than I did. When he got to the airport, they had him on his plane. It was supposed to take off at 8 o'clock in the morning. Mine was supposed to take off at 10 o'clock. Mine didn't take off till 11, and Yehuda's flight didn't take off till 4:30 that afternoon. They put him on the plane, they took him off the plane, they put him on the plane and made him sit there for hours. So by the time he got to North Carolina, I was already sitting on the stage, and he walked in with his suitcase in his hand, ready to go. We spoke for about 2 hours to an audience that had maybe, I don't know how many hundreds of people. A lot of people wanted to talk, a lot of people wanted to have conversations. And then there was a young man whose name is Faris, who asked me to have dinner with him that night. So I turned to Yehuda and I said, do you want to come with us? And he didn't say my day was long and I'm exhausted, or the restaurant you're going to eat isn't kosher, I can't eat that food. He said, yeah, of course, I'd love to go and meet him. Faris sat down with us. He told us about his family. He told us about the social work that they're involved in, a lot of the community work that they do. We sat and spoke till a really late time and close to midnight. I said to him, Faris, I'd love to go and actually see your family. And I turned to Yehuda and I said, do you want to come with me? He said, yeah, let's go. So at midnight, we got into a car, and Faris, with one of his friends, drove Yehuda and I about an hour out. And we pulled into a cemetery, where we visited the graves of Faris's brother, his brother's wife, and his brother's sister-in-law, a young man by the name of Dia, another young woman by the name of Yusr, and another young woman by the name of Razan, who a year prior to, in North Carolina, had been assassinated by a man who lived next door to them and shot them over and over and over, very likely because they were Muslim. And we're standing now in this cemetery. The rain starts to fall. And I go to the grave where Dia and Yusr and Razan are buried. I start to recite the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Fatiha. The tears are dropping from my eyes. And Faris is standing behind me. And this is his family. He has lived Islamophobia in the worst sense of the word. He can't help but cry. And I'm so entrenched in the prayer that I'm praying. This young man is in a place where he's still trying to figure out how that kind of hatred can exist in this world. So my friend Yehuda, who now at 1 o'clock in the morning, who hasn't eaten any food and hasn't gotten any rest, does what he is able to do. He just walks over to Faris, puts his arm around him, and gives him the consolation that he has the ability to. He didn't need to pray the way I pray. He didn't need to pretend to pray the way that I pray. He didn't have to give up aspects of his identity in order for him to be there as fully as he was. He just needed to let himself get out of his comfort zone and recognize that at night he was probably the most important person, and that nobody else could have done what it was that he did. You don't have to be scared to go to places that are unfamiliar. If an Orthodox Jewish rabbi can go to a Muslim cemetery at 1 o'clock in the morning, then you can go and share a meal with somebody who's different from you. If he can stand with us at a highlight when the world doesn't understand why Muslims are upset that individuals are maligning and depicting our Prophet in derogatory ways in cartoons, and beyond anything else, despite what his people say to him that you shouldn't go and do it, he can still stand and literally pray side by side with us. And you can take some steps to going and talking to somebody who's of a different background than you are. It won't really take away anything from you. And if anything, it'll probably help to open up your perspectives in certain ways. For me, if I can be of assistance to you all in any way, please do let me know. We've had some interesting conversations since I've been here. I spoke at a university of Kuala Lumpur, their aviation school, which apparently is really far away from everything. I don't know, because I was passed out in the car on the way there, so was the rest of my family.
It was in Dunkeld.
Yeah, probably. Thank you for laughing at my jokes. What drives you? What is it that motivates you? What is it that compels you? Why do you do what you do? The two questions that I ask people the most when they come to see me in my office, when they call me on the phone, when they're emailing me, trying to make sense of their life. And they have real pain, that life has thrown them all kinds of challenges and they just don't know what to do. The two questions that I ask most often and the responses that I get of I don't know to these questions is one, what are your values? What are the things that really serve as guiding points for your moral compass? Why do you do what you do? Not the answers that you're just supposed to give, but things that are really reflected in your actions and your decisions. And to that, most people say, I don't know. And the second question that I ask them most often that yields the answer of I don't know is, how do you take care of your heart? What are you doing for the betterment of your inside? And the two go hand in hand. So if you don't even know why you're doing what you're doing, there's a good chance that you don't know what's really taking place inside of the most important part of you. If your drive is by just simple satisfaction of your external, your physical, you are motivated by the acquisition of wealth, the acquisition of food, the acquisition of physical intimacy, and there's no consciousness of what it is that you're actually giving a vote to inside of your heart, then all you're going to really give to this world is what it is that you have within you to give to it. And so if you have love inside of you, then you're going to give love to people. If you have peace inside of you, then you'll give peace to people. If you have anger, you have hatred, you have racism, you have confusion, you have greed, and that's what you're going to give to people. And most of us right now might not fall into that extreme of the camp. But I think the biggest challenge that we have to overcome is just our sheer indifference. That we have the ability to do, but we still simply do not do it for whatever reason. The time is more urgent than that. You see the kind of people who are on the headlines every day that are motivated by no interest other than their own self-interest. So whether it's on a grassroots scale or on a smaller scale or whatever scale we have capacity to, you gotta just go out and do right simply because it's the right thing to do. And you have to build partnerships and alliances with people who you have ability to leverage whether you are the majority here for the sake of those who are minorities, or if you find yourself in a minority population, finding the strength and courage to go and build a relationship with those who are in the majority so that together you can go and actively build a better society. And where you might feel the impact should not be lost. But if your influence can only be on a small number, then let it be on whoever it is. You don't know what that person will go out and achieve. So 2 stories that I'll end with. There's a great scholar that came out of the Indian subcontinent by the name of Iqbal. And Iqbal was an individual who wrote a ton of books. He had a lot of degrees. He received a lot of awards and accolades. And Iqbal gets to a place where they actually want to bestow knighthood on him. And when the honor comes forward for knighthood, he says that if you were to give me this honor, then I need for you to also give it to my Quran teacher from when I was a young boy. So they say to him that we've never heard of your teacher before. Can you tell us a little bit about him? What are the kind of things he's engaged his life in? Has he written anything? What are his books? And Iqbal says to them that I am his book. Your stories are being written. If you don't realize how people are present in your stories, they're still there. And if you're not conscious of the absence of certain individuals in your stories, you might not know what it is that you're missing out on. You can play a pivotal role in really impacting the trajectory of someone else's life by just being present in whatever way uniquely you can. And that could go out and make all of the difference. So the second story that I'll end with is about a young man who was a known author in his community. And when he wanted to gain inspiration for his work, he would go out and be in nature. And one day he was walking on the shore of a beach, and he came to a place where he saw a figure that was intriguing to him. It looked like he was doing some kind of dance in the distance. When he got even closer, he saw that it wasn't doing any type of dance, but it seemed to be throwing something into the sea. When he got close enough, he saw that on the shore there was thousands and thousands of starfish, and there was a young boy who was picking them up and throwing them into the water. When he came close to the boy, he asked him, "What is it that you are doing?" The boy said, "I'm throwing the fish into the water." And the man says to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he said that they washed up with the tide, and if I don't do so, they will lose all of their water, they'll dehydrate, and they will surely die. The young man, he looks up and down the coast, and all he sees is fish upon fish. And he looks to the boy and he says, there are so many of them. There is no way you will be able to get all of them back into the water. What is the point of what you are doing? What difference will it really make? The young boy looks at the man. He looks down at the ground. He picks up one of the fish, throws it into the water, and says it made a difference to that one. You can impact even one heart. Go out and do it. What is stopping you? You can let yourself be of a positive catalyst, even in a small capacity. You don't know, that might be what it is that we need to set things really off. Again, if I can ever do anything to be of assistance, please don't hesitate in reaching out. It would be an honor to be able to serve in whatever capacity I can. If any of you are ever in New York, please let us know. My family would love to return the hospitality that we've been getting from you all. Can't guarantee that the food is as good as what we've been eating these last few days. Thanks, baby. And if this is the only time that we are meant to be together, then I pray, inshallah ta'ala, God willing, that we all gather together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. But please keep me in your prayers. You will be in my continued prayers. And I pray that God Almighty blesses you all and gives to you and your loved ones only the best in this world and the best in the next. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And if your reality is confined to an existence that says that things will never change and you believe that people don't have the ability to change, then you're not going to become a catalyst for change. And where there's difficulty today, you have to really believe that tomorrow will be better. That there will be people who will understand and that we will move forward and we will grow to be able to understand how to live harmoniously together. That selfishness and egocentricity and greed will not be the catalyst by which most people will continue to live their lives. And even if there are those who will be in that frame, that there will become that many more who balance it out by living through selflessness, not selfishness. I think the other thing that's very important is that if you go into a role where you are an activist, you go into a role where, not even just an activist, in any part of your life, you have to exert real self-care. You have to be in a place where you understand the importance of really taking care of yourself and your heart, especially if you want to be something of a resource to other people's hearts. And a lot of us just don't know how to do that. We don't have good outlets for ourselves. We don't have moments of real introspection, real contemplation. We don't actively seek mindfulness. We just absorb a lot from others. We just take a lot from others. And in the process, we then start to carry a lot of pain within us, and we don't know how to reconcile it so well. So if I was to ask you the questions that I posed in my lecture, how would you answer them? How do you really take care of your heart? Where do you find time in your day, in your week, in your month, where it's just you for yourself? And not in a way that serves as a distraction from reality, but as a way that really enhances the understanding of the reality that you find yourself in. A long time ago, I stopped thinking in the framework of equity, whether something was fair or not. Because most things end up not being fair. It's not fair that certain people are entitled to certain lifestyles and other people are not. It's not fair that certain people find themselves victim to inequity and oppression, and other people don't even admit the fact that they're oppressive and that they're unjust. It's not fair that we find ourselves in certain places that we should be able to work out of, but the things that confine us are things that we don't even at times have control over. But if I was in a place where all I would allow for myself to do was think about whether something was fair or not, and I didn't assess it in terms of the reality of the situation, then there wouldn't be opportunity to then figure out actual solutions and remedies to those problems and issues. So there'd be a lot of conversation about how everything is not fair, as opposed to, well, this is what it is, And once we acknowledge that this is what it is, then we can turn it into what it is that we want it to be. That we can go out and do real work and not just talk about it, but give the semblance of it. Engage in empty rhetoric and discourse that does nothing other than appease ourselves. And it's a challenge because we live in a place right now where technology can be really amazing. A lot of you know me without us ever having interacted simply because of social media, simply because of YouTube, simply because of online mechanisms that allow for us to have that interaction. But what it also does is complete an opportunity for us to have immediate validation of everything and anything that we say. We can live in an echo chamber where I put something up in some way, shape, or form, and there's going to be a ton of people who will automatically tell me that it's something that they approve of. And then I lose an ability to tolerate something that's different from my perspective. I don't know how to engage in any type of ethical disagreement. And I become so content in just that moment of online activism that really doesn't always yield anything. And it gives me what it is that I need in terms of satisfaction, and keeps me from actually going out and getting done what I have the ability to get done. I don't think it has to be either or, I think it can be both and. I think a lot of our dismalness and hopelessness also stems from what it is that we consume constantly through media channels. If all you're looking at is imagery of pain, if all you're looking at is imagery of violence, if all you're looking at is imagery of arrogance and hatred, your organs of sensory perception are not limited to the eyes that you see with, or the ears that you hear with, or the tongues that you taste with, or the hands that you touch with, or even the minds that you think with. But from purely physiological standpoints, from studies that are done medically, you understand that your heart also is an organ of cognition, and that it bears that type of impact in your life. And literally, what you're engaging in, you're consuming through different ways, and it's starting to impact your inside, and it's going to render a certain hopelessness. You don't have to live distracted from it, but you start to balance it out. In the negativity, where are you bringing positivity? Where do you turn towards spaces that help you to recenter yourself so that you could go back into that world that has a lot of pain in it, and you can be the reason that people have hope in it? In the Islamic tradition, the example through the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a man who went for 23 years without stopping. And he utilized his days in a way where he was actively engaged. He was out there doing all kinds of things. He didn't have the opportunity to renege on any of his responsibilities. So he was the community leader, the military strategist, the political advocate, the counselor, the religious figure, the sermon giver, the orator, the community developer. He was a father, he was a husband, he was a cousin, he was a nephew. He had to do all of these things. And it's crazy because he still had the time to smile at people when he greeted them. He didn't turn his back on anyone when they spoke to him. Amidst all the responsibility, he found enough time to console a young boy whose baby bird had died and let him understand that I'm still here with you. You're not in this on your own. And so his days were spent in those ways, and he utilized his nights as an outlet to be able to reinvigorate and revamp himself. Does that mean you can use those aspects of the nights for yourself? Yes, that's a possibility, but it also indicates he knew himself to the extent of what his outlets would be and how he could give himself the ability to really research. And then he saw the world in ways that other people did not, as did others, messengers and other prophets. An example that I've given in the last couple of days that I've been here revolves around Jesus, peace be upon him, Isa alayhi salam, who when he is walking with his disciples on one occasion, they come upon the carcass of a donkey. And it's putrid, it smells vile, it's wretched. And they comment on it and just how heinous it is. And as much as they're pointing out everything that is inadequate and everything that's lacking, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, he says to them, look at how beautiful its teeth are. But he can see beauty. because he's looking from other places that many of us don't look from. And so where it's dismal and it can be hopeless, understand yourself and let yourself consume what it is that allows for you to balance that out, so that you don't go to the extreme of pretending it doesn't exist. But your absorption of it also doesn't paralyze you and takes you away from being a part of the solution of remedying it in whatever capacity that you can. You see what I mean? Sorry, I talk a lot.
Are there any more questions? Oh.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Nadia. I was wondering if there was any backlash, or if there still remains any backlash from your own Muslim community on multi-faith work. And another question is, if you haven't already, how would you engage with like a Trump supporter?
Oh, I mean, I know a lot of Trump supporters. My wife is a Trump supporter. No, she's not. I don't get any backlash from the Muslim community on the work that I do. I don't think so, right? Interfaith, multi-faith work. I think there's a challenge. There are Muslims in the United States who do. It's very easy to be tokenized in this kind of work. It's also very easy to have this kind of work be whitewashed. And when I was probably 23 years old, I was invited to speak at an interfaith dialogue conference. And it's at a church in Brooklyn that this conference is taking place in. And after I spoke, I gave the keynote. The woman who organized the conference came to sit with me in the chapel of the church. It's not my house of worship, but still a sacred space. As we're talking, we're having conversations, she says, "I'd love for you to come and work with me." And I said, "It's not really my scene, I don't know." And she's like, "We can be very successful. I'm 23, I don't have any mentors, I don't really know what's going on." As I'm still reluctant, she then says to me, "We'll make a lot of money. We could do it really well." And we're sitting in a church, it's just weird defiance of the sacredness of the space. We just came out of a place where for about 30 minutes I talked to people, and whatever conceptualization I have in my own sincerity, of things that I actually believed in. This woman just brought it to a place that made me wonder, what is the point of this kind of stuff? And that's where the challenge is. The engagement of any kind of cross-cultural, multi-faith work can really take advantage of well-intentioned people who see it as a solution, and people who are opportunistic can come and take their money, they can give them the semblance of things, and they can do nothing as a result of it. And that's a challenge. You have to understand that. People turn it into photo opportunities. That doesn't mean that you utilize it as a way to say absolutely all of it is a waste of time, because that doesn't make any sense either. It also can't serve as a mechanism to be in denial of actual social injustices and conflicts that take place. I'm not in a place where in my relationship I have to mince words on any of the world's conflicts. I don't have to pretend like my brothers and sisters who are in Philistine are not going through atrocity. I don't have to water down my comments or my statements because I have a real relationship with somebody. And the depth of that relationship allows for us to then think about active solutions to bring real healing. Because ceasefires are not healing. The place of Gaza was decimated summers ago, and it's still in shambles. And so where people are critical, they might have validity to their criticism if they don't see anything actually coming out of it. So you have to have a plan. There has to be a strategy. And some of the impact is going to be on an intangible level. But there's also elements to have tangible work together. Go out and do service work together. Go out and combat social injustices together. Go out and take on certain things that plague your society together. I had a woman who came to interview me for a documentary on domestic violence. When we sat down, she said that, I researched you and I see that this is something you're passionate about and something that you work towards and, you raise money for, etc., etc. We talked for about an hour on camera, and then afterwards we talked for another hour. And one of her questions had something to do with the effect of, why don't you think more Muslims work on this kind of stuff? And I said to her, a lot of Muslims do, you might just not know them. And I wasn't trying to be rude, but it then turned into a conversation where I said to her, look, you did research on me. You know that I'm passionate about this. You've even seen the kind of work that I've done and what's come out of it. You do this kind of work also. And you're so passionate about it that you're actually making a movie about it. I said, in the mix of all of this, did you ever sit down and ask yourself or think to yourself, maybe he and I can actually work together on something? So a white lady with blonde hair and blue eyes sitting with me in my office, I look still the same way that I did back then. She said to me, no, I never have. I said, why not? I said, you know that you do this, you know that I do this, you know that we both have had our own successes. Wouldn't it just make sense for us to do some of it together? She said, yeah, it would. I said, then really think about what is it that's keeping us apart from each other. Why do you not see me as a potential ally and partner to build? It has nothing to do with the work. It has in the way that we see each other. And so there'll be people who are skeptical because they have validation to their skepticism. They've seen people come together in interfaith work and it's yielded nothing. Post-September 11th in the United States, hundreds of millions of dollars were pumped into interfaith initiatives by foundations run by people of all backgrounds. And many of those foundations became frustrated because the work didn't really go in any direction other than things that were ceremonial. Some of us have to be willing to get down in the trenches and do real work and get our hands dirty. Not just come and sit down and talk with someone where the reality is we're just using it as an outlet to just say our opinions and not hear anybody else. And then it just ends up us going back to our own spaces. Community service work is really great. You can do that. We've started a minor at New York University, the first of its kind in the country, in spiritual multi-faith leadership that we're hoping to build into an actual graduate degree level program. But I think, to challenge yourself to see where it's substantive enough and how you're then leveraging and utilizing those relationships to bring real benefit to people. And to not treat these as things that are platitudinal, but to have metrics in place to measure your success. So it's not just a feeling of feeling good, but there's actually tangible gains that says, look, we're actually doing things that are good. You see what I mean? The other challenge I would say, I'm sorry, I told you I talk a lot, is that many people engage in multi-faith work who are committing atrocities against people. To be able to have a checklist of saying that, well, look, we worked with some people of that community, or look, we're doing something, we're having conversation, but it serves as a mask. And you have to be able to call out things for what they actually are, and not just think that, well, this serves as like a healing for everything. So it doesn't necessarily work in that way. You see what I mean?
Maybe one more question? Okay, two. I saw two hands. So, Jaya.
Maybe you can ask both questions simultaneously and I'll answer them both together.
Hi, my name is Jun. I kind of wanted to ask, you talked a lot about doing active work and you also talked a lot about values. And I wanted to know, how would you balance between doing what our values tell us is right versus respecting someone else's values? So, for example, I don't know a lot about this, but I think there are groups of people who would say like, oh, putting a hijab or a tudung on a woman is misogynistic and we must liberate them from this. And on the other hand, you kind of need to respect that belief. So I'm just kind of wondering, there's a lot of good intentions in the world, and I just want to know how to balance between doing what we feel is right versus respecting someone else's values.
Sure. What was the other question?
Good question. I feel like sometimes in the academic setting, it's easier to build these bridges across, folks who come from different backgrounds. I think the setting itself is conducive for that. Sometimes when you step out of the academic setting to the real world, a lot of people who are in MSA and then they proceed into the young professional or, the parents, that stage, it's harder to maintain some of these interfaith relations. The second question I had was, building on that, how do you expand your interfaith work to the rest of, say, the United States, where some of the folks who say that the folks who are most Islamophobic are those who have never been in contact with a Muslim, right? And so, New York, it's like you'll bump into someone, whether it's a kebab person down the street, but how do you get someone? What are your views on how do you expand this interfaith work to reach the most hardest people to get? The Tom McGellers, perhaps Robert Spencer's of the world. How do you expand the work that you do, and like the obviously very needed work that you do?
Sure. So, I think where there's an overlap in both necessitates understanding for ourselves, like what is the goal or objective individually as well as kind of collectively in this frame of values. And as people come together, how do we understand for ourselves what that really means in the assessment of our own values? You can't not be judgmental. It's not possible. Judgmentalness in and of itself can have positive and negative connotations, right? If I say Malaysians are nice, that's a judgment. If I say Malaysian food is good, that's a judgment. Where it has opportunity now for us to be very introspective is that you're going to get people across the spectrum. Your judgmentalness has to be one that doesn't render for you such a concrete set of convictions that you become unopen to affirming somebody else's ability to influence your sense of values. What does that mean? I can have a mindset that tells me nobody knows anything other than me. And I have to be able to acknowledge my own microaggressions, my own racisms, how I've been socialized to perceive others in the ways that I do. Or I can have a mindset that allows for me to be open to the way somebody else lives their life. And the benefit can be twofold for me. One, I find value in what it is that they do, and I realign my perspective towards theirs, and there's good in that for me. Or I become more concrete in my perspective because I don't believe that their perspective works for me. And there's good in that for me because I become more resolute in what it is that I actually believe. But when I cut somebody off and all I have is a myopic perspective, all I'm living is in my own bubble, in my own box. I don't think well-intentions in and of themselves are really what it is that we can utilize as a measure of whether people are actively doing something that's good or bad. Because in the country that I come from, there are literally like racist, bigoted people who think that it is in my best interest that I don't live in the country that I come from, that I was born into. And they'll say it with a sweet voice. They're not even yelling and screaming. Like, I've had old women who have said to me things. I'm like, how can you say this? But that's just the way that they are. If you get to a place where you have no strategy in how you move forward, and you try to let the metric of your success be by engaging those who are at the complete polar opposite extreme of your spectrum, then you're going to find what it is in terms of your gains and your yields. So if you think a woman shouldn't wear a headscarf and that's something that's oppressive, that's fine. Just understand then that I'm entitled to think that you're wrong. If you're in a place where you believe with a sense of well-intentions in the country that I come from, for example, that if black people just worked harder, they wouldn't have as much difficulty as they did, then just understand, I believe that you're an idiot. You preach these false truths, these fictitious truths that just get you to a place where you're not conscious of what the reality is of someone else. And it's just to be able to validate and justify for yourself a certain perspective that's about elevating you while denigrating somebody else. There's no sense of anything other than real, and I say this objectively, that's what arrogance is. That's what it is. And what becomes difficult is then people start to lose aspects of their identity. People become scared to actually be who it is that they want to be. There's a ton of women where I come from who want to wear headscarves and they don't because they believe they'll be mistreated. They believe that they'll be abused. They believe they won't get jobs. Right now, they believe someone might push them in front of a train. Someone might hit them. Someone might beat them. And the old lady who's sitting in her house saying that, well, you know what, baby, it's just backwards. You're in America now. She really believes that she's right. She doesn't believe that she's wrong. She believes that it's in your best interest that you let go of that backwards way of thinking and living. She doesn't see how it's dangerous for her. My life ambition is to not get a Pamela Geller to understand what my life is about. I've met Pamela Geller. The first time I met her, I didn't even know who she was. And I was standing next to somebody and I said, why is this woman staring at me like this? She looks like she literally wants to kick me in my throat. He said, do you know who that is? She is in her space, that's fine. My existence is not to live in reaction to her. Nor is my existence to be in a place where I have to identify my life through the box that she tries to put me in, that most assuredly I am much bigger than. The people that I will go to and that I will be with, even if someone like her needed my help, God willing, I pray that I would go to be there for her. The gross majority of people who are in a place where they are those people who just need to meet somebody are not necessarily of that ilk. And if you let your standard be by putting people who are of the other in a place where your identification of them is from the worst example of who they are, then you're just doing what people do to us. People think Muslims around the world are just ISIS. People think Muslims around the world are just those individuals. If you think everybody who is in America, you think everybody who is on the right, everybody who is a Republican is Donald Trump, and that's millions of people that you're cutting off and you're putting into a box who can try to understand certain things. We just had in the United States the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. The Democratic National Convention had multiple Muslims speaking, both to the tens of thousands at that convention, as well as the millions in the global audience who were talking. One man by the name of Khizr got up and talked about his son, who was a United States military member, who died in a suicide bombing in Iraq. And when he got up, he challenged Donald Trump. And he said, you have never sacrificed anything. He pulled the Constitution out of his pocket and said, you seem to have never read this. You can borrow my copy. And since his speech, every news agency has been talking about him, speaking about him, and it's been a wake-up call for people. It doesn't exist in a good Muslim, bad Muslim framework, but helps them to just understand Muslims in a different light than what others are depicting them to be. That's where it comes down to. You gotta tell your own stories. You gotta tell your own narratives. You gotta be in a place where you ask, well, when I graduate from college, I don't have as much time. You have to make time. And that's not pointing a finger at anybody, but to be able to say that if it's important, that it's important enough to make time. And I say this to you objectively. I have a wife, I have 2 kids, they're right here with me, right now. I would love to be able to go around, show them sightseeing, sit down, share a meal with them, do whatever it is that I can. My wife will tell you, we make time for our children. We have a great relationship with them, alhamdulillah. We also have to be able to be in a place where we sacrifice certain things. And I'll say that to you. Because it's not just about us. It has to be about many things that are much bigger than us. And for me, it's not just about how I get my 2 beautiful children ready for this world. But what is it that I'm going to do right now to get this world ready for my children? So they don't have to go through the same garbage that I go through. And they don't have to make decisions through a frame of selfishness that doesn't understand what it is that they have going on. So you're going to meet people who they just don't get it. And that's fine. They might come around. And some people will say things to you that are shocking. If you can maintain a certain sense of decor and a certain sense of equilibrium of your inside while still expressing the fact that you are talking just sheer nonsense. I sat down with a congressman in the United States the other day, a man who is responsible for building legislation and policy in our country. And we're at a convening to talk about the rise of anti-Muslim sentiment and work with people who are politicians, faith leaders, media personalities to start to deal with some of this. This man is sitting right next to me. And after a presentation that talks about the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment, hate crimes, and violence, he says that that was great, but it doesn't address the fear that I have. So what do you mean? He said, for example, I would never fly Egypt Air because I'm worried that the Muslim pilot might blow us up and fly into something. I said, are you kidding me, man? So I said to that audience, in a very respectful way, you gotta understand, this man can be valid in his fear. I'm sure he's scared. But he doesn't mute that fear when he's sitting down to make laws that run this country that impact my life. And as he's going back and forth with me and we're having conversations, he says to them, what's wrong with me saying this? I said, man, what if I said to you that I don't want to sit with you anywhere because I'm scared that you might pull out a gun and shoot me because of the number of white men who have engaged in mass shootings in this country over the last year alone, taking the lives of many. And simply because you are a white man, you might have more of a likelihood of shooting somebody. His face changed and he was like, you're being judgmental of me. So what do you think you're doing to me and my people? Conversations can be tough. You gotta put yourself in certain places. But I know what I believe in. I know what my values are. I'm gonna be this person in any gathering. I won't change it for anybody. If somebody pushes back on me, I'm gonna push back too, because my mind is not gonna be colonized. I'm not gonna believe that I'm secondary. And because I won't believe that I'm secondary, I won't believe that anybody else should be treated secondary as well. Just because he's of a certain office and just because he represents the majority, he can still learn something. And even if he doesn't learn, the rest of the people there need to be able to hear it for their own learning process. You see what I'm saying? If I said that, hey, I can't go and do this, because look at everything that I might lose in the process. And I might not really be thinking about all the other gains that are there that don't have to do just with me and myself. You see what I mean? Again, if I can be helpful in any way, please let me know. You can contact me through social media, send me an email. Adriana has all my contact info, you can get it from her. Whatever it is that we can do to do work together, it would be an honor to do that together. And your being here tonight is an indication of some type of commitment to that. Tomorrow, whether somebody from far away comes or not, your challenge is going to be how do you come together just because you need to come together? And how do you sit down and you start to harness your talents and your skills and your credentials and your resources to go out and build the world that you want this world to actually be? You sit down and one of you says to the rest of you, what are we going to do as diverse individuals to make this world a better place? Not just for people who are like us, but for everybody. Where we can really leverage what it is that we have to offer to ensure that we're not the cause of something terrible happening. Because I might not be the perpetrator, but if I see it taking place and I have the ability to do something about it and I'm still not doing it, I'm just as bad, if not worse, than the one who's causing the injustice in the first place. Whatever you can do, wherever it is that I can be helpful, please let me know. And God willing, we'll be able to build something that's much better for those who are going to be coming after us. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
I feel very